Thanks everyone for coming today. Let's go ahead and get started. We've got a lot to cover, so I want to make sure we have time for that. Thanks for joining us for the first in a series of brown bag webinars on careers in fire adaptation, presented by us, the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network. We're so glad you're here, and we hope that this today will prove to be a useful opportunity to learn about career pathways in this great and important field. We're joined today by our esteemed panelists, Chris Chambers from Ashland, Oregon, Justice Jones from Austin, Texas, and Danielle McNutt from Boulder Fire in Boulder, Colorado. So we're so glad you're here. I'm just going to talk us through the agenda briefly. I'll give a quick introduction to who we are for folks who are new to Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network and the fire networks in general. We'll have presentations from each of our panelists, and then we'll have some time for question and answer. And at the end, I've collected some resources that I think will be useful for folks who are trying to learn more about how to learn and grow and connect in this career space. So thanks for being here. The Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network, or FACnet for short, is part of a broader partnership comprised of three other learning networks: the Fire Learning Network, the Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, or TREX, and also the Women's TREX, and the Indigenous Peoples Burning Network. Together, we are a group of people working to leverage the power of interconnection across landscape and across scale to share learnings, resources, and expertise to see improvements and make progress in living better with fire in different contexts. So Fire Learning Network is a little bit more focused on the landscape scale. TREX is primarily about training and capacity building in the workforce, specifically in prescribed burning. Indigenous Peoples Burning Network engages primarily with Indigenous peoples. And the Fire Adapted Communities Learning Network is focused primarily on the community scale, but we all work together. We work across those staffs and across those landscapes and focus areas. These are the guiding values of our work. We believe in fostering a collaborative approach, as I mentioned earlier, building local capacity and leadership. That ties into developing a workforce for the future, which is how today's engagement is part of that value and something that we really want to work on. And we also think it's helpful and important to leverage our situation between scales to understand what's happening at the local and regional level and share that with our national partners and vice versa. We believe that people are at the center of this work. Fire itself is a natural phenomenon, but fire management is a social issue. And so we believe that developing connection, learning, understanding between people, and sharing resources is what makes us successful in this work. Here you can see some connection between those networks. We work across several scales. We share some membership, all towards the ends that I've described. This map is a little out of date, but gives a good idea of where we work in each of those different networks. And I'm going to stop there. I think Chris is going to give us not only his intro to his career path, but also a little bit on the wildfire problem or dynamic as it is today. So I'll pass it over to Chris Chambers in Ashland, Oregon.
Thanks, David. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me and you're seeing my bio slide. Yes? Okay, I got the thumbs up. Thanks, Danielle. Good afternoon, depending on where you are, or good morning. It's really an honor to be here to talk about careers in wildfire mitigation. Certainly become one of the big issues of our time and multiple generations to come. So that you are all interested in this field is really important, because this is a vexing problem that we need a lot of diverse perspectives to work on. My particular background started actually with the U.S. Forest Service in 1997, where I got hired as a seasonal and did a lot of different jobs. I'll talk about that in a little bit. but that just really motivated me and realized quickly this is what I want my career to be. So I went and got a degree from Oregon State University. Go Beavers. But I also saw somebody from UC Davis on here, so go Aggies, because I was at UC Davis before Oregon State as well. So, and then just got a lot of on-the-job training, as it were, in working here for the last 20, almost 23 years now, working on community wildfire protection plans, Firewise communities programs that we stood up here now called Fire Adapted Ashland, managing municipal forest lands and prescribed burns. I'll talk about all of these as we move forward. And I've worked across the country, program with Justice. That's how we met long ago, working for the International Association of Fire Chiefs. And I've also worked on the Oregon Governor's Wildfire Task Force in 2019 and 2020. And that set Oregon up to pass some really groundbreaking legislation post 2020 fires. All right, just a little bit about the issue. Okay, hopefully this is going to advance. There's always a little bit of a delay. Okay, I'm trying 3 different ways to advance the slide. Okay, there we go. I like this quote because it kind of sums up where we are right now. The significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. We've inherited a lot of mismanagement and a lot of really flammable landscapes and communities. And now it's our job to figure out how to undo a lot of that, build new and resilient communities and ecosystems that can withstand the current pressure of climate change as well as what's to come. So where is this happening around the country? David showed the great map of where all the networks are working. This isn't a West-wide problem. Yes, it's probably concentrated in the West, but the issue of wildland urban interface fires, losing homes, and which is increasingly an issue. I'm sure I probably don't need to describe too much of that because you all watch the news and or have been impacted in your local communities in one way or another. This map I like, although it only goes until 2019, but it shows 1,921 communities that experienced a fire of over 100 acres within 2 miles of their town. Undoubtedly, the numbers have only gone up since 2019, but it gives you a pretty good feel for the national scope of the issue, crossing many different sociological barriers as well as ecosystem situations all across our country. A picture I took here just adjacent to Ashland in the community of Talent during the 2020 Alameda fire, just to throw a little life experience in here. Everything in the foreground of this picture burned in this wildfire. 2,500 structures, hundreds of outbuildings, businesses, you name it. So it's not just an issue of homes burning while people are living in the forests. This is impacting downtown USA across our country, and in many, many ways. And I'll get into a little bit of that in what academic pathways are out there. So another example from the Alameda fire, dropping fire retardant literally down the main street of an urban community. Things like that never happened, probably before 10 to 15 years ago. But now we're looking at significant issues, again, impacting all aspects of communities. So a little bit about Ashland. I'm located in Southern Oregon, right on the California border. So we're the dry side of Oregon. This is a map that shows predicted flame lengths over the entire landscape of the eastern Siskiyou Mountains that border Ashland. Our municipal watershed, importantly, is between us, which is the Ashland label, and Mount Ashland, the top of the watershed. So that's a really important resource for the community. We're right along Interstate 5, so we do get ignitions from that traffic and people along that route. We've had some significant fire losses. In addition to the Alameda fire, which actually started in Ashland, we've lost homes within our community. One was a fire along I-5 that burned a dozen homes a decade ago. So it's a very real issue for our community, as it is for a lot of communities. The city of Ashland has really resolved to put some resources toward the wildfire problem. And I was the first of those resources back in 2002 when I was hired here. So how did I get into this position? Like I mentioned, I started with the U.S. Forest Service. I had also worked for the Bureau of Land Management and some in private industry. But I got my degree in natural resources / forest ecology emphasis at Oregon State. A lot of universities out there offer similar degrees now. That wasn't the case 20 years ago, but there's a lot of opportunities. I'm going to focus a little bit on the forest and fuels management aspect of this, as well as academic pursuits. Some of you are joining from school, so you're already into this right now. But there are a lot of opportunities to do academic work, either as a background for employment and or to do research in the field. I'm always working with researchers in my position from various universities. There's a lot happening right now in the field of wildfire mitigation and for fire ecology, specifically in the field of research. What I really appreciated about my education at Oregon State, it was really broad-based, and I chose not to focus specifically on an issue and go really deep into it, but I got a really broad background in classes in like sociology, anthropology, communications, climate and weather. Communications has been particularly important. As David mentioned, this is essentially a people problem. And the better you are at communicating with people, both written, oral, all modes of communication, the better off you'll be. And certainly taking classes and focusing on that aspect of it, I would highly recommend. There's a lot of opportunities to work in all facets of wildfire mitigation and management that involve computer modeling, analysis, statistics, emergency management, accounting and administration. You could actually just focus on a specific degree that's not necessarily focused in life sciences, engineering, sociology, landscape architecture, construction, community planning, public administration, fire service administration. I work with people who work in all of those fields because this is such a all-consuming problem of our socioeconomic situation and ecologic situation. That we have to bring all the tools to bear on it, and that includes all of those degrees and areas of expertise. Whoops, I didn't really want that to go forward. Sorry. And community college, I actually started in community college in my education pathway. I think it's an awesome path to go. It saves a lot of money. I didn't have a big mountain of debt when I came out of school, and in part that was due to going to first 2 years in community colleges. And also community colleges more and more are offering degrees and or courses in fire prevention and management. You kind of have to look at your local community colleges to see what's offered. And in terms of work experience, I mentioned starting with the Forest Service. I also did a stint with the Bureau of Land Management, a little bit in private industry, working with private landowners, not industrial forest lands per se. But I had experience in wildlife, fire, botany, timber, fisheries. And if you don't have a red card or have never worked as a firefighter, I would recommend that if you have the opportunity and can do that. It's great to get experience on the ground. I think some of the best researchers I know are people who started off as firefighters, hot shots, who have done some time on the ground. They know and can speak with some authority and experience to the issue when they got into upper management and prevention type positions. So I would say get your hands dirty if at all possible. Get out in communities, do some hard work. It makes you appreciate having a job that's not manual labor all day. And it's really important to get that experience. So the collision of fuels and community wildfire safety is a really important aspect of this job and many jobs in this industry. So we have done some really cool mapping looking at fuel models. And if you don't know what a fuel model is, it doesn't matter, but just the influence of community wildfire safety of wildfire fuels. Our town is surrounded by wildfire fuel. So having an idea of how to manage those fuels, like this picture, cutting brush, That was a job I actually did do for about 6 months. It was the hardest work I've ever done, and also doing the prescribed burning part of it. I find myself more and more involved in logging projects as forests die around our community, and we need to create healthy forests. Certainly an issue not unique to the West in having a lot of drought and insects and disease out there. Our latest project in the spring was a helicopter logging project right in people's backyards. You can see the helicopter in the background and the log truck on the right. So that's a lot of kind of on the job knowledge that I had to gain from experience working with the forest products industry. Prescribed burning is also a big part of what I do, and there are a lot of ways to get involved and get experience in prescribed burning. These are what we call burn piles, and this is all like in the WUI areas of our city, right on the edges of homes. And then also using prescribed fire, and I would call it broadcast burn or underburn, restoring the natural role of fire is a big part of our programs. And dealing with smoke. There's definitely a big public health aspect to this career. People are impacted by smoke. I suspect many of you, if not all of you, have been impacted by smoke where you live. Understanding the need to use fire and to make smoke. This smoke in Ashland is from a prescribed fire, but also wildfire smoke is part of our programs here in Ashland and keeping our population healthy. So the last slide here, non-academic career pathways. I talked a bit about the academic pathways, but certainly starting off with any of the state and federal agencies. And I work with a lot of colleagues who just started off down that career path and stayed in a particular agency. Started at the bottom as a firefighter and have worked their way up. There are a lot of positions in fuels management and fuel mitigation, and then also a pitch for local fire departments who specifically have fire prevention and also wildfire divisions like Austin and Boulder. Fire inspectors, fire marshals, firefighters, community risk reduction positions all offer opportunities to work in this field and to move up in the world as you have your career. So I think that's a great transition to Danielle, who works in a local fire department as well. And that is the end of mine.
Great. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate the CRR shout out. I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay, am I coming in all right?
Looks great. Thanks, Danielle.
So today we're talking about pathways to wildfire adaptation. And after talking to Justice and Chris, I'm going to focus on skills for community resilience. I work for the Boulder Fire Department, and I'll introduce myself in a second, but there were a couple points I really wanted to bring home in my presentation. One is that social engagement is as essential as technical mitigation. Here we have a picture of an HOA that participated in a preparedness day. Every job can be wildfire related. This is me at the Calwood Education Center in Jamestown, Colorado. And then always embrace unexpected opportunities. And this is when I worked for Boulder County Parks and Open Space, and I'm actually holding an endangered Preble's meadow jumping mouse, which was a fun experience. Oh, how do I go back? Sorry. My name is Danielle McNutt. I work for Boulder Fire-Rescue. I'm currently the Community Risk Reduction Senior Program Manager. I started in 2017 as a life safety educator with the department. In 2020, I became a CRR specialist. And what that meant was that we really shifted our education programs to doing a lot of preschool visits and fire extinguisher trainings to really focusing on what our calls are with the fire department and what our risks are in the community. So, we do a lot of wildfire education and a home assessment program, but we also do a lot of car seat installs and smoke alarm installs. And in 2023, I was able to hire on a team of 3 community risk reduction specialists to the department. I am not a firefighter. In that picture, I swear I'm not even pretending to be one. I came into the fire department with no fire department experience. I actually applied for my position twice after not getting it the first time. And now that I'm in the department, I've really found my place in community risk reduction and in prevention and mitigation. So Boulder, Colorado has a population of about 106,000 people. We're 25 square miles, so not very big, but we're surrounded by 45,000 acres of open space. It's quite literally a green ring that goes around our city. We have 8 fire stations, and one of them is a dedicated wildland fire station. We have dedicated wildland division. We're a college town and a home rule city in Boulder County. We run about 13,000 calls per year. Here are a few maps. At the department, we like to joke that Boulder is 25 square miles surrounded by reality. Politics aside, we are definitely surrounded by a risk of wildfire here in the city. So that first map that you see on the left is from our CWPP, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of blobs from fire outlines that we've had in the past, and none of them have really impacted our city limits. You can see the Marshall Fire down there at the bottom in the red. The middle picture is a nice photo of the Boulder bubble that we live in here. This is from the Colorado State Forest Service wildfire risk viewer. And then on here on the left is our open space, and you can see all the green is that open space. To the west are the foothills. And when you fly over Boulder at night, you'll literally see a black ring that goes around our city. This is a good photograph that shows that interface. The WUI is what we call it, is that western edge, and then we have our famous flatirons there. But you'll see it's a very high density neighborhood right up against the foothills. So I actually wanted to talk about the unlikely pathways that I took into fire adaptation. I went to University of Florida, go Gators. I studied in education and anthropology when I was there, and my graduate studies really focused on environmental anthropology and how people are interacting with their environments. But today I'm really going to focus on 3 positions that really helped set me up for success here at the fire department. I've been with our department for about 7 years. My first job was as a museum educator at a Museum of Science and History in Jacksonville, Florida, and then I was promoted to the public programs manager. And then I went on to become an education and outreach specialist for our Boulder County Parks and Open Space here in Colorado, which was a seasonal position. Chris mentioned he also started seasonally too. And then before I started with the fire department, I was the development director at a nonprofit, Calwood Education Center in Jamestown. If that name sounds familiar, it's from the Calwood fire that was the largest fire that we had here in Boulder County. Development director just means I was doing a lot of the fundraising and grant writing, but since it was a nonprofit, I also did a lot of instruction as well. These 3 positions really helped me learn how to focus on the community resilience piece. So when I was at MOSH at the museum, I did a lot of science shows and helped with exhibits. And right there in the corner, you can see a picture of our Sparky, our Tesla coil. But what I learned working in a museum setting was that you have to make complex information accessible to the public and then turn that information into exhibits and programs. While you're doing that, you've got to appeal to a variety of people that come into the museum doors. And working at museums, I don't know if anyone's had a chance to go recently, but there's definitely an emphasis on engaging experiences and really going beyond passive learning. How do you build this curiosity and interest, with the public? And what I found really challenging with informal education doing these types of programming is that you have to learn from audience feedback as you're going. And I find that I have to do that quite a bit in my position now with the fire department. With Boulder County Parks and Open Space, I started seasonally as an education and outreach specialist after the 2013 floods. So a lot of what I did there was helping with volunteer work projects on open space. So working with the public in small groups, whether it was a corporate company or a school group or just general public. But what I learned doing those flood recovery projects is that you're going to have to navigate community needs and competing priorities all the time when it comes to wildfire resilience. You need to build that trust and encourage the community to get involved and coordinate, lots of coordination and empowerment of people to really take this collective action that we're asking of the community. Part of that was learning how to communicate these long-term goals and the value in this restoration and this resilience work. And for me, it was really great because I learned a lot about adaptation strategies, which was obviously an academic interest of mine in graduate school. When I went to Calwood, Calwood Education Center is a nonprofit, and they have about 1,200 acres up in the foothills, and they really work to get all kids to experience the mountains. So we have school groups come up of kids from all over Denver and the Front Range, and they would spend 3 days out in the wilderness. We had a little cabin, but really amazing property and an amazing mission. And what I learned when I was doing all this like fundraising and development work is that you really had to mobilize people around a shared mission. You wanted to empower children to be able to take this ownership and lead projects when they left the campus of Calwood to go back to their homes and communities. So a lot of fundraising is building these strong partnerships and learning to collaborate with a multiple of stakeholders. You might be coordinating fundraising events or programs or projects, and you really have to make those purpose-driven projects for people. So communicating the impact of someone's individual actions for this collective impact, also securing that funding and resources to support those programs was really beneficial for me. So, here's a picture of me with a class that I had from Aurora that was a lot of the students' first times up in the foothills. And so that was just a really valuable experience for me before I came into the fire department. So there are really these transferable skills that I wanted to emphasize that Chris alluded to or talked about in his presentation. But there's this public communication piece, which is really that awareness and education. And then there's the community engagement piece. And that to me is where you're having dialogue and you're building relationships and really building that trust in the community. And then there's the volunteer coordination and collaboration, which to me is the actual implementation. It's the actual action. And so these skills help take like the awareness and trust will equal action in my experience. So this is This is my position now. I'm Community Risk Reduction Senior Program Manager, and I'm learning in this position. I think the only thing I've really figured out is that we need a holistic approach to risk reduction. Some questions I have that I would encourage all of you on the call to help answer is, how do we adapt communication for these changing audiences? How can we deepen community trust and collaboration? How do we find these new ways to empower the community? And then how do we learn from new wildfire resilience research and technology? So my advice to you all, really the 3 points I made at the beginning is build those communication and community engagement skills. Working with the public, it can be exhausting sometimes, but I will say that you can learn just as much from the difficult residents and colleagues and partners than you can from the good ones. And so really learning those skills is very critical. I would encourage you to pursue experiences in diverse fields, right? Like every job is wildfire related, and you might come into it without a lot of experience. I know when I started at the fire department, I was like the life safety educator. I had no fire background and really feeling like, oh, am I out of my element here? But what I brought to the position was really important, having that that variety of background. And then, to be open to these sort of like unconventional career paths that you may not, think of. And I think that you got to go with the flow. And there's been a lot of times in my career that I felt underpaid and undervalued. And why can't I just get a full-time job? And I felt like it took me a while to get there, but now that I'm working on this issue, I've found all of those experiences to be super beneficial. So keep your chin up and get in any way you can, and work your way up. So I also like to finish on a quote. Science provides answers, but it's people that make the choices, which is really critical in the work we do with wildfires. So this is my contact information and the link to our home assessment page. Thank you.
Thanks, Danielle. We'll go ahead and take it to Justice Jones in Austin. Thanks for sharing your contact as well, Danielle. We'll be following up with a recording and some of the resources we're dropping for participants too, as a reminder. Take it away, Justice.
Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. What wonderful presentation by Chris and Danielle. A lot of really great and detailed information. I think what I'm going to focus on for my portion of the presentation is more of a call to action, because we need you in the wildland community. Humanity needs more people focused on this. And so my hope today, along with my partners, is to inculcate you into the wildland fire world in some way, because as Danielle mentioned, almost any job has an impact on wildfire, and we'll talk about that. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Justice Jones. I'm the Wildfire Mitigation Officer for the Austin Fire Department currently, where I help lead efforts in Austin to become more adapted to wildfire. Part of that process is understanding the needs and values of other partners, and we're going to talk about that fairly extensively. A little bit of background on myself. I started my career in wildland fire at the Smoky Bear Ranger District, which is Capitan, New Mexico, the birthplace of Smoky Bear. So a good place to start out in wildland fire. I started out as a wildfire mitigation forester with the Resource and Conservation District grant through the New Mexico State Forestry. And I did that for the better part of a year, working for landowners, implementing a cost share to mitigate wildland vegetation on their property. And that really drove home what Danielle had mentioned, is that this is about people first and not about trees or buildings or other aspects of our physical environment. It requires creating a cultural shift. And I learned that distinctly by working with landowners in the mountains of New Mexico who were predominantly from West Texas, where you don't have any trees. And so my job was to talk them into cutting down about half of their trees for their own good, which really drives home the need for that communication skills, the ability to empathize and relate with folks.
Hey, Justice.
In addition to that, I spent 2 years working for the village of Ruidoso, which at the time was one of the top 20 communities at risk across the nation. We developed a code to address structure vulnerability in wildland urban interface areas. And we also developed a vegetation management standard, one of the first in the country outside of California, specific to wildfire. And through that process, again, learned a lot about how wildfire mitigation can be effectively implemented. What got me into the interest of wildland fire was my interest in Indigenous people and their land use and land management practices. So like Danielle and Chris, I was very interested in anthropology. I ended up getting a double major from the University of Texas in environmental resource management and cultural anthropology, because I wanted to understand how humans use and interact with our natural and built environment. So that was a my path from an educational standpoint, it wasn't intentional towards wildland fire. It was more focused on indigenous land management practices. I became aware of prescribed fire being one of the main mechanisms of indigenous practices later on when I find myself implementing that and making that connection. So just to kind of give you a little bit of background, from New Mexico, I was recruited to start the Texas A&M Forest Services Wildland Urban Interface program, where I worked with communities across the state to prepare for wildfire. In 2012, I was recruited by the Ashland Fire Department to help initiate the Wildfire Division, which was one of the first municipal wildfire divisions in the state. And through that process, we developed strategies that have been implemented over the last decade to increase Austin's resilience to wildfire. If you weren't aware, because we mostly hear about communities out west in relation to wildfire risk, Austin was ranked number 5 in the nation for potential economic recovery costs. That means if we had a fire, the cost for rebuilding is astronomical compared to other places in the country. The other top 4 communities were located in California, if that gives you some context. So a little bit about how we started our process in wildfire risk reduction in Austin was understanding that risk. And that's the platform for anybody wanting to confront these issues, is through that understanding of wildfire risk. It's significant in Austin, and I won't go into too much detail, but we have over 100,000 structures at potentially high risk and many more at lower levels, which we know any risk level can be a factor.
Justice,
I just kind of
what
wanted
is
to paint a picture of what we're up against from wildfire at a global level and a national level. We're burning more acres than we have unintentionally in U.S. History as far as we've been tracking wildfire occurrence. Majority of the new building is happening in the wildland urban interface, or areas that are at risk. We're estimating 25 billion plus annual economic impacts from wildfire. And so that's how a country could go bankrupt, is by not confronting impacts in the billions. And 1 in 3 homes are located in that wildland urban interface. So the problems exist, it's getting worse, and we need help in solving it. Part of the reason it's getting worse, as most of you are aware of, is that we're seeing changes in our climate that are exacerbating fire behavior. And I won't dive into in too much detail, but we know we're experiencing more fires. They're more severe, more intense, and they're resulting in greater economic and natural resources being destroyed and damaged. So certainly this is a call to action. So what's the future if we do not become more fire resilient? We're going to see increased impacts from wildfire, as I mentioned. The loss of life is increasing astronomically with the Paradise Fire and the Lahaina Fire. We know this is a real threat to life, not just property and natural resources. Folks are dying from the indirect impacts of wildfire, from smoke-related illnesses. California just recently released a study that quantified in the last 10 years, almost 100,000 people have died from indirect fire impacts, and communities are dealing with that, like Ashland, and the pictures that Chris showed. We're approaching an insurance and affordability crisis. In Austin, we get calls from frantic residents every day that their insurance company is dropping them. And so insurance is certainly a factor in wildfire. Not just insurance as an issue, but the people working in that industry can be partners or they can be adversaries, depending on whether we cultivate appropriate relationships. And then we're going to see increased environmental degradation, water quality impacts, post-fire impacts as a result of these catastrophic fires. In fact, the majority of the costs that is inherited by communities is after the firefighting is stopped and those secondary impacts begin to happen. And so we're going to talk about some positions that can help us address all those. But what we want to shoot for is not death and destruction and mayhem. We want rainbows and butterflies. We want a brighter future for those that are going to come behind us. And so in order to do that, we need fire adapted humans. We need others like yourself who are willing to step up into this realm, dedicate their time and energy to helping humanity navigate this crisis. Through that, we need to establish ecosystem resiliency. We'll talk about some of the jobs that focus on that. Our goal is, Danielle and Chris mentioned, is we want empowered communities. We want less fear, more positive action towards solutions, so we can have healthier people and stronger economy. And wildfire has the potential to threaten all of those. So it really is going to take is building community resilience. It's going to take codifying that resilience, and so making rules related to wildfire safety and planning effectively for future growth and how our communities are going to navigate this change and be adapted to our fire environments. So some of the position specific that play a really important role in wildfire adaptation is emergency management. Emergency managers are the principal planners for all hazards in a community. They're also one of the main sources and mechanisms for funding to address those hazards. So working with emergency management has been a very powerful relationship from my perspective, and one of those positions that can really contribute to wildfire solutions. Urban and rural planning is extremely important. What's happening right now is planners are designing communities that are death traps, not because they're bad people, because they don't understand the impacts of wildfire. So we need planners in place that understand their decisions and how they affect people downstream, both first responders and the public that's moving into these communities and areas. We need to be able to tell that story. The geographic information systems are one of the best ways to do that. And GIS specialists, as we call them, are key resources to addressing wildfire. In fact, everything we do in Austin is based on geographic information analysis. We use science to make informed decisions. And so GIS analysts are some of the most critical resources in the wildfire realm right now. They may not be ever at the end of a shovel or a hose, but they're contributing to the solution. Utilities and critical infrastructure are being threatened and are causing issues in communities like never before. Austin just helped support its utility in hiring a wildfire program manager to focus on their role in wildfire adaptation. They can be part of the problem by causing fires, but they can also be part of the solution. And the reality is, if your critical infrastructure goes down during a wildfire, you're going to have a hard time continuing that fight, because power feeds water, water feeds firefighting. And so without folks in place to protect that critical infrastructure, we'll have major gaps in our community's wildfire protection. Land managers are critical to restoring our ecosystems and building resiliency, and that can look like a lot of different things. Chris mentioned fire ecologists, biologists, silviculturalists. The folks that are out there shaping our natural environment are critical in helping us navigate these changes in our climate and our environment. Having land management plans in place are critical for community wildfire safety, because it helps us understand the steps we need to take to protect a community from a vegetation management standpoint. Public Works is really important because they manage the right-of-ways, our evacuation corridors, our bridges, our ways in and out of communities, so our ingress and egress. So we work very closely with our Public Works specialists from that regard. Debris management and biomass is critical. You can do a lot of good work in forests and yards, but if you can't manage the byproducts of that mitigation, i.e. vegetation, you're just moving fuel and fire potential around. And so having ways to utilize and dispose of those forest or ecosystem byproducts are really important. And there's a lot of growth in that realm right now. Sustainability, the least sustainable thing that can happen is your community burns down from a wildfire. The costs from a tax base are astronomical. There's communities that are going bankrupt because they can't recover from the cost of these wildfires. And so designing in a way that's sustainable and resilient is key moving forward. One of our biggest partners in Austin is our Office of Sustainability, because they help us understand climate impacts. They help us understand long-term strategies for community sustainability. And so sustainability is another realm that's really important to wildfire. Building officials are creating our built environment and approving the steps that it takes for that to become manifest. And so if you're not working with a building official, you're probably missing an opportunity to increase the resilience to your community's impact from wildfire. But also you can have a big impact in the overall sustainability of your community by being in one of these roles of being a building official or a planner. Equity is increasingly important. It always has been, but we're recognizing that vulnerable populations are being impacted in ways that weren't anticipated before. Losses in vulnerable communities are resulting in things like gentrification, loss of nuclear families and tax base. Vulnerable families have a more difficult time recovering after a wildfire occurs. And so ensuring that we're equally distributing our efforts to mitigate wildfire risk across communities is really important. We work with our equity officer to ensure those strategies are implemented into what we do. And then not to forget the private sector. There's a lot of opportunities in consulting and working from a private sector standpoint to contribute to wildland fire solutions. And those are some general wildfire resiliency positions. I want to speak just specifically for a minute to some of the wildland fire management positions that are out there. This is within the specific realm of wildland fire management. That usually takes place in coordination with an organization or an agency, but there are private wildland firefighting agencies. In fact, one of the largest firefighting agencies in the country is a private firefighting company who does a lot of good work in communities across the country. So there's different roles and responsibilities within the fire community that you can contribute to. Certainly, administration is important. That's how we run and establish programs and keep them funded and keep the structures in place. The implementation of wildfire mitigation programs often take place in the form of fuels management, where we're mitigating wildfire risk in our communities or adjacent to our communities. I mentioned city planners, but also fire planners or fire management planners. It's a specific position that helps us, like Chris mentioned, plan our prescribed burns, plan our mitigation efforts, help us understand how wildfire relates to development practices. And then there's the boots on the ground operations firefighters. And some people start out in this path and move into other areas, but it's not necessary. It's good experience, but it shouldn't keep you from contributing to the wildland fire management community. This usually starts out as a line firefighter, and you work your way up through the ropes and through the chain of command to higher and higher positions of responsibility. One of the most important roles that someone can step into is in the realm of post-fire recovery. It's not just the initial impacts of these fires that are catastrophic. It's the secondary and tertiary impacts, flooding, loss of soil, erosion, lahars, events like that that can be as damaging as the original fire. And then I think most importantly is community risk reduction, prevention, and education, of helping shape future minds to understand the environment that we're in, how they can contribute to being a part of the solution, and where humanity fits in this equation. Without that, all the other strategies will fail if we don't have a cultural shift and folks moving from being at risk to more adapted to fire. So just to give you kind of a ballpark, and I think some of these actually are low estimates depending on where you are in the country, of some of the salaries you can expect working in fire science or fire management. For example, our prescribed fire coordinator in Austin, we come in about $30,000 higher than that base position. So depending on where you're at, your experience and your qualifications, you may fall somewhere in this range. But there's certainly lots of opportunities from a career and economic standpoint to step up to the plate and to step into this realm. For the fire service, our main roles, just so you understand, if you're interested in working in a fire department, is to provide the public with situational awareness. We do that through our GIS mapping and working with our GIS analysts to conduct risk assessments, so we have a common operating picture and understanding of risk. Then we work with our firefighters to plan how we're going to respond to wildfires, communicate to the public what a realistic expectation of outcome is. And so we don't want to give the public a false sense of security. If there's work that needs to be done, if there's actions that need to be taken, we want to encourage those to happen so we can leverage the work that's happening on the ground into operational advantages. If you're going to work for a fire department, at the end of the day, your success is how effective you were from an operational standpoint. That's very often your bar. And so we want to make sure that the mitigation that's happening and the planning that's happening at the end of that day, that helps a firefighter be more successful in protecting you or your community or your natural resources. So we result in defendable communities that are ignition resistant. Here's my contact information. As with everyone, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to help provide guidance or input for anybody that I can. One of the things that I take pride in is not so much what I've done, but the fact that I've built a lot of capacity in the wildfire realm. In Austin and Travis County alone, we started out with one wildfire division of about 5 people, and we have about 25 full-time positions focused on fire management between Austin and Travis County, which is a tremendous amount of capacity building over the last 10 years. And I would say if I did anything right, it was to help bring others into the fold to help solve this issue, because one agency, one entity, and one individual can never do this alone. It really takes a community, fire community, to address this. So thank you.
Thank you, Justice. Thanks to all of our presenters for such great information, for taking the time. Folks, these guys just took time out of their jobs to do this. So I want to give a big thanks to our presenters for doing that. It means a lot to have your time and your insight from your careers. So thanks for that. We're really short on time. I might just quickly visit one of these questions and ask for maybe just one or two of our panelists to add to it. What are the seasonal opportunities to gain experience that you're aware of, whether that's in your department or some other agency or group that you're aware of? This person, I think, was specifically asking about wildland experience, but I think however you want to answer that, just briefly, and then I'll do some closing slides.
Well, I can jump in. I know there's a lot of opportunities, and certainly I took advantage of that as I started my career to work for federal agencies, and that's I think the biggest opportunity out there, because there are so many federal agencies that hire seasonal positions, but also look for state agencies and as well as some local groups as well. Tribes can be a great source of employment. They are getting a lot of money to do wildfire mitigation work, as well as local fire departments. And there are some local fire departments that do hire seasonal positions for fuels mitigation as well as firefighting. We just don't happen to have that here, but I know like Santa Fe, New Mexico and Boise, Idaho both have programs that hire seasonal firefighters, and oftentimes that bleeds over into doing fuels mitigation work in the shoulder seasons to the main fire season.
Thanks, Chris.
We don't have any seasonal positions with our fire department, but we're a municipal fire department. So there's other departments within the city that do have seasonal roles, especially with our open space program. It's the Boulder Open Space and Mountain Parks, and other forestry teams get red carded as part of their seasonal sort of duties. And as we do prescribed fire, they come and help with those types of training opportunities. And so that's an option. I worked seasonally for our open space program for a little bit.
It might also be worth considering looking into youth conservation corps. They exist all across the country, and for a lot of folks, they're their first entry into the wildland realm. And you can get a lot of great experience working with those groups.
Yeah, I'll add an emphasis on that, because we do work with a lot of youth work crews as well, across all kinds of different backgrounds. So that's a great way to get involved.
Yeah, we actually have the Mile High Youth Corps at one of our manufactured home communities helping with mitigation work this week. So definitely shout out to them.
Huh. That was one of my first jobs out of college, was managing a crew for the Mile High Youth Corps. And I was not SAW certified, so I was swamping for the Sawyers. And that is, as Chris said, the hardest work I've ever done for sure. So, but really, really valuable, especially being in this role now and working with folks who are more at a desk, being so appreciative of the incredible physical labor that goes into so much of the work that we need to see get done on the ground. I'm just going to briefly share my screen again, and Emily's going to drop some resources in the chat for folks. Let's see, I think this is the one I want. Yeah. So there's some opportunities for further learning here. Again, these links will go in the chat. We'll also send out a recording I also want to know, Emily mentioned, hey, what about these skills or this aspect of this work specifically in nonprofits? Good time to mention we will be doing more of these with different presenters with different experience, talking about their career pathways. So if you registered for this, you will be emailed about opportunities to engage again in the next one. We also wanted to note this resource that is available funding specifically for student projects in research, several job boards, and then a few more resources. These are some mentorship programs in the field that students might be interested in looking at, and some further training opportunities. And there's my contact information at the bottom if anyone wants to follow up with me directly. So thank you all so much for being here. This has been such a rich opportunity to hear from the experience of these awesome working professionals. Thank you again to Chris, Danielle, and Justice. And thanks to my colleague Emily for your help with the technical side of things.
Thank you
Please be
so
in
much for
touch.
the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks, Danielle.
Good to see everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.